My partner's desperate need for attention. During his father's terminal illness is causing us to drift apart. Can I support him without losing myself? My 30F partner's, 31M, coping mechanism for his father's terminal illness is giving me the ick. How can I be less judgmental? I realize I'm probably going to get crucified for this, but here goes nothing. My FIL has stage 4 cancer and is terminal. When we first found out 2 years ago, my partner took it upon himself to walk around the neighborhood and knock on the neighbors' doors to inform them immediately. I didn't dare tell his family he did this. He had messaged probably upwards of 20 people on Facebook, his own friends, to inform them within the first week. I try not to, but I keep feeling like it's an attention grab. These feelings are kept as internal thoughts, and I consider myself very supportive and involved with his family, but can struggle with my partner. Today, he told me there was some bad news about the cancer spreading. His mom begged him not to tell anyone, but within minutes he was on the phone letting people know. She got really upset, and again begged him to stop. He headed off outside, and I'm pretty sure he was on the phone to people. He's done this before multiple times. It's almost like he goes manic when he talks about his dad's illness. So fast and sometimes blown out of proportion. I also recently found out I might have a small issue with my heart. I don't think it's anything sinister, but I'm getting a few tests done and taking some precautions. All of a sudden, I started noticing my partner is getting messages from his friends, people I barely know wishing us all the best and a speedy recovery. There's nothing even really that wrong with me. I was even sent flowers. I felt like people thought I was dying. I told my partner if he is seeking more attention and affection from me, I can provide him with that. I'm not the most affectionate person. But I try. I'm just finding it hard to sympathize because it's making me uncomfortable and awkward. Update 1. Things have taken a surprising turn since I last shared my thoughts about my partner's way of coping with his father's terminal illness. I've been trying to approach the situation with empathy, reminding myself that grief is a messy process, but it's tough when my gut feeling keeps pushing me in a different direction. After I posted, I read through the comments, and while I appreciated the supportive vibes, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. A few days ago, we had another incident that pushed my concerns back into the spotlight. His dad was scheduled for a routine checkup, and my partner was understandably anxious. Before the doctor even had a chance to deliver the results, he went into full-on panic mode, sending group texts to his friends saying things like, "The doctors are worried, and this could be serious." I can appreciate the desire to keep his friends in the loop, but it felt so premature. And honestly, it triggered my anxiety. I mean, what if his dad got better news than expected and my partner made it seem worse than it was? Later that evening, we got the update from the doctor, which turned out to be fairly stable. Yes, his dad's condition wasn't great, but it hadn't worsened, and that felt like a small victory. When I saw my partner's friends start messaging us, concerned about his dad's health, it hit me hard. His mom was furious when she learned about the texts, and I found myself in the awkward position of trying to be the middleman. She reached out to me and asked if I could talk to him, which put me in a tough spot. I didn't want to seem like I was ganging up on him, but I also understood her frustration. So I sat him down, hoping to have an honest conversation. I told him that while I completely understood that he was scared and felt the need to share, constantly broadcasting potentially alarming news was hurting his family more than helping. I shared my feelings about how his need to inform others seemed like a cry for attention, which I thought he might not realize he was doing. To my surprise, he didn't take it well at all. He grew defensive and argued that he needed his friends to know what was happening because they were his support system. I tried to reason with him, saying that support shouldn't come at the expense of creating more panic, but it felt like I was talking to a wall. The following day was even more surreal. My partner came home with a bouquet of flowers from one of his friends, and I was completely blindsided. It wasn't my birthday or an anniversary, and to be honest, I didn't even know who this friend was. When I asked him about it, he casually mentioned that the friend wanted to cheer us up during this tough time. I felt uncomfortable. It felt like a mix of pity and forced sympathy that I wasn't sure I wanted or needed. It was like I was receiving sympathy for something that wasn't even dire. This friend didn't know the reality of our situation, just the dramatized version my partner had shared. When I confronted him about it, he seemed confused. He didn't understand why I was upset and insisted that friends sending flowers was just a nice gesture. I felt guilty for my reaction, but also frustrated that he wasn't seeing the bigger picture. It's not that I wanted him to stop communicating with his friends or to bottle up his feelings, but this incessant need to project his fears and uncertainties onto others felt selfish. I started noticing that his behavior was affecting our relationship in ways I didn't anticipate. I had a few heart tests coming up, which I mentioned before, and suddenly he was acting like I was on my deathbed. He would hover around me, constantly checking in, asking how I was feeling, and even subtly hinting for reassurance that I was okay. I get that he's scared, but it felt like my minor health issue had suddenly been magnified into something catastrophic in his mind, and I was trying to figure out how to balance being supportive while also feeling overwhelmed by his reactions. After a week of this pattern, I decided it was time to set some boundaries. I calmly told him that while I appreciated his concern, I didn't need him to treat me like I was gravely ill. It was a struggle to get him to understand that my situation wasn't as dire as he was making it out to be. I told him he didn't have to put on a show for his friends, making everything seem worse than it is, especially when it wasn't helpful for anyone, least of all his dad. It was clear he wasn't ready to hear that. He seemed lost in his own spiral, and I felt like I was watching him slowly unravel. The tension between us started building, and it became apparent that my initial feelings were valid. I love my partner, and I want to support him, but I also need to take care of myself and my emotional well-being. It became evident that I had to tread carefully as we navigated these waters, and I found myself feeling more like a caretaker than a partner. I've been questioning whether I should continue pushing him to confront this behavior or step back a bit and let him process things his way. I can't help but wonder if this is a phase he will eventually outgrow or if it's a deeper issue that we need to address. I'm still grappling with how to express my discomfort without coming off as insensitive, and honestly, I'm exhausted. It's a delicate dance, and right now, I'm not sure how to keep my balance without losing myself in the process. Update 2. The past week has been a whirlwind, and I'm still reeling from everything that's happened. After my last post, I really took a step back to assess how I was feeling and what I needed moving forward. I thought maybe some distance might help my partner gain some clarity, but it just turned into a storm of emotions and misunderstandings. So, things got really intense when my partner's dad had another doctor's appointment. It was supposed to be a routine follow-up, and I hoped my partner would have a more grounded approach this time. I told him I would be there for support, but asked him to wait until we got the results before he started calling his friends. He agreed, or at least that's what he said, but I could see the anxiety building in him like a pressure cooker ready to blow. The day of the appointment arrived, and I tried to stay calm, but I could feel the tension in the air. When we got to the hospital, my partner was pacing in the waiting area, and I could see him biting his nails. I wanted to reach out, but I also knew that I needed to maintain some boundaries for my own sanity. As we sat there waiting, I watched him scroll through his phone. Part of me hoped he was looking for distractions, but I knew better. I could see the notifications lighting up, and my stomach sank. Sure enough, just as the doctor walked in to deliver the results, my partner's phone buzzed with messages. I couldn't help but hold my breath, fearing that he might slip into his old habits again. Thankfully, he didn't interrupt the appointment, but the moment the doctor finished explaining the results, he was out of his seat, and before I knew it, he was calling his friends to share the news. I felt my heart drop as I realized that even though the news was stable, he was about to spin it into a narrative that would leave people worried and anxious. When he hung up, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I pulled him aside and tried to explain how damaging this cycle had become. I reminded him how his mom had been upset the last time he did this, and that it was creating unnecessary chaos for everyone involved. I pointed out that he was seeking validation through other people's concern rather than processing his own feelings. He looked at me with frustration, insisting that he was just trying to keep everyone in the loop. It felt like talking to a brick wall, and the more I tried to reason with him, the more he dug in his heels. Then, to my shock, I got a message from one of his friends, asking how my partner was holding up and expressing sympathy for what we were going through. It felt surreal, like I was living in a strange alternate reality where I had become a character in my own drama. I relayed the message to my partner, hoping it might snap him into realizing how out of hand this had gotten. Instead, he just shrugged it off, saying his friends were just being supportive. I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. It was as if he was deliberately ignoring the fact that this wasn't a supportive environment for either of us. The emotional toll began to wear on me, and I realized I had been bottling up my own feelings while trying to support him. It was exhausting trying to manage my own anxiety about my health and his spiraling emotions. I spent several sleepless nights worrying about how we would navigate this together. I knew I had to have another serious conversation with him, but I was terrified of how he would react. Finally, I decided to write down my feelings in a letter. I thought it would help me articulate what I needed to say without being drowned out by his defenses. I poured my heart out, explaining how I felt sidelined in our relationship, like I was merely an observer in his emotional turmoil. I told him that I loved him, but I couldn't continue living in this chaos without losing myself completely. I also expressed my fear that his way of coping could eventually drive a wedge between us if he didn't learn to process things in a healthier manner. When I handed him the letter, he read it quietly, and for the first time, I could see a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He didn't say anything right away, but I could tell that it resonated with him. I held my breath, hoping that this would finally be the turning point we needed. After what felt like an eternity, he put the letter down and said he wanted to talk about it. That conversation ended up being one of the most honest and raw exchanges we've had. He opened up about how terrified he was of losing his dad and how he felt powerless to do anything about it. I listened as he shared his fears and frustrations, and in that moment, I realized that underneath all the chaos, he was just a scared kid facing a reality that felt far too big for him to handle. We talked for hours, diving deep into the complexities of grief, love, and the pressures of being strong for the ones we care about. I reminded him that it was okay to feel vulnerable and that sharing those feelings with me would help us grow closer instead of drifting apart. I also reiterated that he didn't have to shoulder this burden alone. After that night, things shifted slightly. He started taking a step back from oversharing and instead focused on talking to me about how he felt. It wasn't perfect. He still had moments of panic and would reach for his phone out of habit. However, he seemed more aware of when he was doing it and would pause to ask himself if it was truly necessary. I could see him trying, and for now, that was enough. Our relationship has become a mix of navigating the storm while also finding moments of clarity and connection. I know this journey is far from over, but it feels like we're starting to find our footing again. I've realized that we can't control how grief manifests, but we can control how we respond to it together. We're both learning that it's okay to lean on each other without the pressure of performing for an audience. It's about creating a space where we can both feel safe enough to be ourselves. No theatrics required.